Go home. You don't like America? Leave this country. We're proud to be Americans.
One of the weirder part about being an Asian American in that COVID-19 area is that you get victimized twice. Like, on one hand, you're afraid of virus as much as anybody else. It's at that point, like, that's all you are hearing from the media, and then your country hates you. They don't say it openly, but when people are yelling things to you, telling you to go back to countries you are not even from, cause you are from America, you start to get a hint. The American dream has accompanied Asian Americans' growth. However, Asian immigrants were once deprived of their right to naturalize as citizens. Due to the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese people become one of the first group of undocumented immigrants. The American dream is appealing, attracting generations of immigrants who come despite hardship. While Japanese Americans fought for the United States, their family was interned and imprisoned. Legal advocacy is crucial as a link political right. Despite the tragedies throughout the immigration journey, opportunities abound. The Asian voices is growing stronger. There is a group of young people who are fighting to eliminate injustice. They are exercising their right. This story tells us about the meaning of life, about resilience and the pursuit of a more equitable system for all. From this hope, the Asian American movement was born. While Asian Americans sought to be perpetual foreigners, mistaken for visitors or recent immigrants, even when they are native-born Americans, part of the answer lies in the absence of the historical record of the experience of Asian immigrants and their descendants in North America. Asian to North American begin with Manila men, Filipino sailors who settled in Louisiana after jumping ship from the Manila-Acapulco trade route around 1763. Early immigrants also included peddlers, merchants, and seafarers from various Asian regions, but few become naturalized citizens. The Naturalization Act of 1790 allowed U.S. citizenship only for free white people. Although the 14th Amendment ratified in 1868 extended citizenship to freed African slaves, it did not include Chinese and other Asians. Subsequent exclusionary laws passed in the late 18th and early 20th centuries further restrict Asian immigration and citizenship. The significant wave of Asian migration to the U.S. occurred during the California Gold Rush of 1850s, as thousands of Chinese fled poverty, famine, and unrest in their homeland. This migration continued due to the agriculture and industrial development in the late 19th century and the demand for cheap labor following in the emancipation of black slaves and the 13th Amendment in 1865. Chinese migrants worked on plantations in Cuba and Peru, while the South American labored in Canada and the Caribbean under British rule. Additionally, Chinese workers were recruited to build the Central Pacific Railroad in 1860s, as well as to work in factories, farms, and canneries despite facing harsh conditions. These immigrants play a crucial role in meeting labor demand and contributing to the infrastructure of a rapidly industrial nation. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act marked the first U.S. law restricting immigration and citizenship based on the national origin, influencing broader Asian immigrant inclusions. Discrimination affected Asians from various backgrounds, and by the early 20th century, the Immigration Act of 1970s expanded exclusions to a broader Asiatic bar zone. This allows little strict broader regulation and restrictions on Asian immigrants, as the U.S. become a gatekeeper nation, as noted by historian Erica Lee. The Immigration Act of 1924 further reformed Asian exclusions. These exclusion laws persisted for over 16 years. The Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed by the Magnuson Act of 1943, partly due to the Chinese World War II alliance with the U.S. Later bans were lifted for immigrants from India and the Philippines. The World Bridges Act of 1945 and 1946 allowed entry for families of U.S. military. Despite these changes, Asian immigration quotas remained low, with most countries limited to 100 immigrants per year and a total cap of 2,000. According to Erica Lee, in this period, Asians remained the only group regulated by race rather than nationality or place of birth. Anna May Wong was born on January 3, 1905 in Los Angeles, not far from Chinatown. She was born into a laundry worker's family and often delivered stacks of freshly washed clothes to customers. The tips she earned was spent on going to the movies. This experience shaped her desire to enter Hollywood and act in films. Anna May's first role was in the movie The Tale of the Sea. At that time, she was 17, playing a Madame Butterfly who became pregnant by an American man, ultimately giving the child to him and then taking her own life.
How would you like to go to America, Lotus?
One of her most famous roles was as a Mongolian slave girl in The Thief of Baghdad. Her image quickly became the template for how Hollywood portrayed every Eastern female character. In the film, her attire was indeed somehow revealing, but this led to her rise to fame. Her acting career was intricately connected to Americans' attitude towards Asians. In an interview, she said,
"Why are we always cast as the villains? You know, we're a civilization that is much older than Western civilization."
Joked that her tombstone should definitely read something like, "She was a person died 1,000 times, because in every movie she would neither commit suicide, was killed, or died." May film roles eluded her, so when Hollywood planned a major film about China to good earth, she saw a chance to succeed. Produced by MGM with a $2 million budget, it was well known in Los Angeles Chinatown. The film exemplified Hollywood trend of casting white actors in Asian roles, with Paul Mully and Louis Rayner as the Chinese farmer and his wife, respectively, with a winning Oscar. Practice of yellow face revealed the era's racial bias as white actors applied makeup to mimic Asian features, perpetuating negative stereotypes. Anna May Wong knew that the securing a lead role could transform her career, but she was only offered the role of Lotus, supporting villainous wife. In 1935, she said to Los Angeles Times,
"They dared to ask me to audition for the only villainous role in the movie, and I'm the only one of Chinese descent."
December 16, 1935, Darling Phinia, I auditioned for the role of Lotus twice. From all indications, Miss Rayner would certainly choose to play Olam. Given the obstacles, it was useless to fight for it anymore. Almost everyone, including my friends, said I should take on the role of Lotus. Always, Anna May Wong.
The history of Asian Americans involves not only immigrants coming to the U.S. to seek their fortunes, but also the colonial expansion of U.S. power abroad and its rule over territorial subjects. The 19th century Manifest Destiny doctrine justified European settlers' seizure of indigenous lands and resource extraction to expand a white-dominated nation. The U.S. annexed new states during the Mexican-American War of 1846 and took over Hawaii in 1893. Following the Spanish-American War in 1898, the U.S. gained temporary control over Cuba, the acquired Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines as territories. This was vital for U.S. military interests in the Pacific, and until 1913, the U.S. fought against Filipino insurgents seeking independence. After defeating Spain, the U.S. controlled the Philippines until the 1934 Tydings-McDuffie Act, establishing a path to independence, significantly impacting Filipino immigration to the U.S. During the early 20th century, as immigration from other Asian countries was severely restricted, many Filipino men, the Manongs, migrated for work in agriculture and industry while also serving in the U.S. military. Despite being U.S. nationals, they were denied citizenship and faced oppressive labor conditions, discrimination, and racial violence. The 1934 Tydings-McDuffie Act limited Filipino immigration to 50 people per year and reclassified the Manongs from territorial subjects to aliens. In the 20s and 30s, over 100,000 Filipino men flocked to America seeking new opportunities. They became migrant workers and followed the crop cycles all over the West Coast. Lariat Leong and the Filipino Manos, which means elder, began the Delano grape strike to protest the unjust wages and poor working conditions of farmers.
I'm gonna be very frank with you. I have all kinds of guts, you know. I'm not scared of nobody fighting for the rights of people in this country.
Farm owners often pitted Filipino workers against Mexican workers in an attempt to sabotage the protest. Despite those attempts, the biggest protest, the Delano grape strike, was built on the partnership between the two groups. On September 8, 1965, Filipino farmers led by Lariat Leong protested unfair wages and working conditions. Cesar Chavez, who led the Mexican farmers, wanted to wait 2 or 3 more years before they protested. But Lariat Leong told Chavez they could not wait. The Manos were getting old. Liam asked him to join forces, and together they founded the United States Farm Workers, or UFW. Liam asked him to join forces, and together they founded the United States Farm Workers, or UFW. The work he did was significant enough to get a union here at a time when, for the most part, Filipinos didn't really speak up. The strike lasted 5 years and gained national and international support. The successful protest resulted in a contract granting farmers fair wages, benefits, and protections.
One of the most dramatic examples of anti-Asian feeling came during the World War II, when an estimated 120,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated. Following the December 7, 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 1966, leading to the mass removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Families had as little as 48 hours to sell their properties before being taken to assembly centers and 10 internment camps across the U.S., including Topaz in Utah and Manzanar in California. Despite 2/3 being American citizens by birth, they faced imprisonment without due process, cramped living conditions, poor sanitation, and constant surveillance by armed guards. After Japan's defeat in World War II, the U.S. shifted to expanding its military, economic, and cultural influence in Asia and the Pacific, occupying Japan post-surrender and establishing a strong military presence. Fears of communism after the rise of communist rule in China prompted U.S. involvement in the Korean War of 1950 to 1953, the Vietnam War of 1955 to 1975, bombings in Cambodia from 1969 to 1970, and the CIA's covert quote-unquote secret war in Laos from 1964 to 1973. Post-World War II legal changes and evolving attitudes toward Asian Americans impacted immigration. The 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act abolished national origin quotas, shifting U.S. immigration from Europe to Asia and Latin America, allowing for family reunification and skilled labor preferences that welcomed more women and educated professionals. The 1980 Refugee Act initiated a significant resettlement for those fleeing war-torn Southeast Asia and opened opportunities for refugees worldwide.
U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War led to the evacuation of over 130,000 Vietnamese closely linked to American allies. Similarly, many Cambodians fled civil war after the Khmer Rouge's 1979 overthrow, while Lao and Hmong refugees escaped to the U.S. after the communist takeover. Between 1975 and 1980, nearly 433,000 individuals from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos immigrated to the U.S. These migration waves highlight the complex realities of being Asian American, challenging the notion of the immigrant as someone who voluntarily leaves for economic prosperity, as the exclusion laws hindered such choices. Filipino Americans often came from territories considered unincorporated, and Southeast Asian refugees were forced to flee destabilized homelands shaped by colonialism and conflict.
When I returned from Vietnam, I experienced a significant culture shock.
Especially in the 1960s when we left, everyone was watching The Little Rascals. But when we came back, the hippie movement and the extreme anti-war protests were in full swing. I began attending Los Angeles City College. I was a Vietnam War veteran, and there weren't many people like me at the time. So this topic often came up. Hey, you fought in Vietnam, you're an Asian American and a Marine veteran. What do you think about this war?
Before and during the war, I had no concept of the racist tendencies surrounding it. I deeply felt this after the war. The trauma brought by the war was unspeakable. I desperately wanted to understand what had really happened, so I began to pay attention to the anti-war movement. It was in the auditorium of a Holiday Inn where about 15 chairs were placed in the front row of the audience. Veterans from different groups walked up to the front to share the various atrocities they had witnessed or participated in during the war. Our group was the only non-white audience present, and no one had invited us to participate. Toward the end, we walked up ourselves and sat down at those tables, and just like that, we began to speak.
How were these atrocities committed? Such things cannot happen without reason. It all depends on what they say. They would tell you that those people are not even considered human, but they cannot deny the testimonies of all the people in this room.
Thousands of Vietnamese people are still finding ways to escape their homeland in search of a new life in a foreign land. And these refugees, known as boat people, continue to arrive. Sometimes there were as thousands in a single day. The Vietnam War officially ended, but the impact of the war will last for many years as a new generation of Southeast Asian refugees join the larger Asian American community. The term model minority originated from sociologist William Peterson's 1966 New York Times article. He praised Japanese American for overcoming the stigma of World War II, considerations to families' values, work ethic, and educational success. Model minority concept constrained the achievement of certain Asian Americans with the perceived shortcomings of Black and other non-model minorities, creating a political wedge and undermining social programs like affirmative action. Dynamic contribute to tensions between Asian American and minority communities, as seen during aftermath of 1982 Vincent Jean Chen incident, which led to violence against whole Asian American communities. Many Asian Americans, as a model minority, overlooked the impact of factors such as ethnicity, class, and access to education that limit the political activism and interracial solidarity. It also obscured significant disparities within and among various Asian American communities. At the end of the film, I would like to conclude this short film that spans Asian American history with a script, The Chinese Lady, inspired by the experience of Feng Mei, the first Chinese woman from America.
My name is Feng Mei. I came to America in 1834 when I was 14 years old. It is the year 1882, and I am 62 years old. As you can see, I am still here. But where is here? This is not an exhibition. This is a different space entirely. Though you will please indulge me as I allow the details of where I am to remain a mystery for the time being. In this year, 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, banning Chinese migration to the United States for 10 years. Those Chinese already here are forced to find refuge in new spaces, their own improvised spaces, separate spaces, and safe spaces, like this one. This room was built with the hope that it might serve as a platform for understanding, for learning, for sharing. Just as Feng Mei, was built with hope for understanding, for learning, for sharing. But just as the room did not fulfill its purpose, I offer to you my friends my deepest and most sincere apology. For I too did not fulfill mine. In the year 1871, a mob of 500 Californians descended upon the residents of Los Angeles' Chinatown. 52 Chinese Americans are injured, while 20 are tortured, lynched, and displayed along the town's borders in the exhibition. It is the year 1885, and I am 65 years old. One of these spaces, in Sweetwater County, Wyoming, is burned to the ground by a mob of 150 white men, resulting in the mutilation, decapitation, and castration of 50 Chinese American miners, many of whom are burned alive or left to die along the river as they fled. It is the year 1887, and I am 67 years old. The Snake River Massacre in Hell's Canyon, Oregon, resulted in the death and torture of 34 Chinese Americans, stripped of their gold and their bodies dumped in the river. Many will not be discovered for years. It is the year 1892. I am 72 years old. The Chinese Exclusion Act is renewed for another 10 years. If only I could have shown you how we are so alike in many beautiful ways, and how we are so different in many beautiful ways as well. It is the year 1902, and I am 82 years old. The Chinese Exclusion Act is made permanent. I am so sorry. We are pushed further and further away, and so we make our own space. Separate space, like this one. Let me tell you about this space.